Time you would like to come and visit me, I will provide you meals anytime. Jessamine County, all right? I am not, pardon? Nicholasville, you're correct. I am not the person that is on your agenda. If there was an agenda and it said Laurie Taylor Thomas, I am not she. She had something that came up that was immediate for her to have to go to. So she asked me if I would help out this evening. I've done this program before. I kind of know where she's going with it. I think that you probably will appreciate it, and we'll go from there. You may take notes. You don't have to. You'll find out why here in a few minutes. And I'll simply get started by showing you a book that I purchased 50 years ago, I guess. It's on tree identification, $11 to boot. And I purchased that book to take the class, Tree Identification. And it was very interesting in that I went into the class on a Monday, and the instructor showed us tree after tree after tree. Back then it was 35 millimeter slides, and showed us these trees, explained to us how to memorize the characteristics of those trees. Monday went well. You know, there was probably 10 or so trees introduced. Then Wednesday came along, introduced more trees. It became a little cumbersome, but on Friday not only was there another class, but there was a field exercise where the graduate student took us out, pointed to these trees, pointed to the characteristics, and then the weekend came. And that is where things got very cloudy. And that was, there was no one to lean on. There was no graduate student. I didn't know anybody in the class, so I was out there basically by myself. Hadn't memorized the trees to the degree that they wanted us to. Plus, there were other trees that were out there that we hadn't even gone over. And so it became very difficult, I thought. And memorization, I found out 50 years ago, was not the way to go to identify trees. And so what we're going to do, I guess, oh, I see what it is. I understand what's going on. For the next 50 minutes or so, what we're going to do is learn how to identify trees. All the trees. Every tree. All right? And there may be a few individuals in here, in fact, all of you may know how to identify every tree that there is. What we're going to do then is we're simply going to clarify how you are subconsciously doing this. Thirdly, we're going to send you out of here today with the basic fundamentals to identify any tree, any plant. And from what I'm hearing from your instructors, we're going to go so far as to be able to identify any plant or animal that's in the world. All right, that is my objective in the next 50 minutes. Plus, I'll throw in a few other extras for you. Get your money's worth here. We're going to have a test or two. I don't know if they told you that, but we'll have a test or two tonight. And learn a little bit of Greek and Latin. I mean, why waste all that time by just learning how to identify things? So that's what my objective is for this evening, in the next 50 minutes or so. This is your class, folks. If you have a question, please feel free to simply interrupt me. There's no problem whatsoever. The thing that I found out is I may have said something out of sequence that I shouldn't have done, throws you out of kilter, and then what happens is you're trying to catch up and I'm going forward. I have found out that when that one person either puts up their hand or simply says, "Doug, stop, I have a question," the other people in the room sigh, a great big sigh of relief, saying, "Boy, am I glad somebody took the initiative to slow this guy down." So it's your class. We want you to walk out of here tonight with as much information as you can in the correct format. Now, with so many different species, how do we learn how to identify them? Here in the state of Kentucky, we have over 120 trees. I'm a forester by trade. And so there's about 120 trees that a forester needs to be aware of. Now, they may not all be big trees, may not be able to may not be able to make 2x4s out of them, but a red bud is very important to a forester because by knowing a red bud, we can identify the value of that site, S-I-T-E, that it is resting on, which lends itself towards what other trees should be there. So there's about 120. There's about 50 that are commercially important here in the state of Kentucky that we make things out of. Houses, furniture, interior of houses. There's about 50 of them that are out there. Railroad ties. That's a story unto itself. There's millions of these things that are sold annually. But how is it that we learn to identify these things? Well, here's a picture. They are both identical. And you're saying, already we're going down the wrong path. The one on the right and the one on the left are identical. And that is, you don't know either side, either picture. You don't know who that is, and you don't know what those are. Trees and people. What I'm looking for, which is going to be the key word throughout this evening, is one word. It starts with a C and it's real long as to how we identify at least this picture on the right and those individual people. I'm looking for one word, great big long one, starts with a C. Thank you very much. That is the word we're looking for. See, we're already headed in the right direction. I knew this was a good class. They told me so. Okay, this picture is nothing more than a collage of pretty pictures. But what it does describe is there are different characteristics of those trees. Let me back up one step here. What are some of the characteristics that we can see to identify people? Either that picture or this group of people. What is it that we can use as characteristics?
Gender.
Gender is one.
Height.
Height is one.
Color.
Tone, yes. Skin tone?
Yeah.
Okay, skin tone, yes. Come on in, folks. No problem. Hair or the lack of hair color, yes, very good. Those are all characteristics which we don't have a problem with using to identify people. Because what we do is, by knowing those characteristics, that's how we actually identify that person and be able to put a name or a label on those. The same thing's going to happen when we start looking at these trees over here. All right, so characteristics. And we're going to be going through those this evening. And again, all I wanted to do is to show you very quickly, characteristics. Again, I'm not pointing them out. I think it's very visible to see on those 5 photographs that there's different characteristics of trees. Now, the season of the year. This is the best season of the year to do it. Winter is not the best one to pick because it lacks those two things. Leaves and fruit. A lot of the times you may not even have fruit on the trees. Sometimes in the winter you may have fruit available to you. But the leaves are the big characteristic that help us in the identification of plants. Now, if your class has a lot of extra time, I can come back and tell you how to identify in the winter. Got a little slide program for that one too. But tonight we're going to rest upon summer. I will give you a word of caution right now. If at the end of this 50 minutes and you say to yourself, I'm going to go out this weekend and learn how to identify trees, the thing that I would suggest is take somebody with you that knows how to identify trees. Now I'm going to give you a crutch to lean on in a few minutes, but this person that knows how to identify trees, if you give them 1 inch, they will take miles upon miles. And if you start letting them identify the tree for you, just by putting a label on it, they don't know how to stop talking. They just keep on going and going. And you will see that the crutch that I give you, you need to work your way through that and only have that person there to say one thing. It's either the right tree or the wrong tree. And also for them to give you some key elements as to where you may have gone wrong. But if you let somebody that knows how to identify trees take the lead, you're going to be back to the memorization part of the whole thing. Okay, leaves on method. There's 2 groups, conifers and broadleaves. All right, and I think we're going to get to them in a moment, but we've already started the process of singling out trees. We have a group of conifers and we have a group of broadleaves. Now we're not getting into the concept of identifying trees here, but when the people see this one on the left-hand side, they're holding back so hard as to what the name of that tree is. And it is what? Sassafras. It is a sassafras. And the characteristic of sassafras is on any one tree you'll have 3 different shaped leaves. The mitten shapes, the single finger, the tri-fingers, and the one pod mitt. They're all on one. And then the one on the right, not that we need to get into it, is a hemlock. We'll talk about it here in just a few seconds. So those are the broad groups of trees that we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about the conifers first. We're going to talk about the cedar first. Now again, you may want to take notes, but it's not necessary. You'll see why here shortly. You don't need to write all this stuff down. On the cedar, wherever that light is stopping, which it's not doing, but every one of those is a leaf. They are very, very small. So any one point on that needle, or any one point on that branch is a needle. They're very, very small. And if you've ever dealt with cedar, this part of the world is notorious for cedar. If you've ever brought one in for a, we're not allowed to say the word Christmas tree. If you've ever brought it in for a holiday tree, you put your hand in there and you come out with spots all over your arms because of the prickling that goes on from the cedar. And also, what about the bark, or not the bark, but the wood of a cedar? Anybody know what color? Red. It's reddish, yeah. It's the stuff that you can buy at the stuff marts for hamsters. You know, you buy those bundles of shavings. Cedar is a lot of it because it also has a smell to it too. And again, I'm getting too deep into this particular one, but I just wanted to start off that those are the things that you learn about as you go along here. But cedar is that particular tree where it's a flattened needle, very, very small, sharp when you put your hand into it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about conifers that have needles in bundles. And the first one I'm going to talk about is not a bundle, but we're getting into that array of gathering of needles. Whenever you have a bundle, and we have conifers of 2s, 3s, and 5s, whenever you talk about the bundle, the technical term is a fascicle. So a fascicle of needles is whenever you have a group of needles. And there are some, and this is one of them, where you don't have needles in a bundle, but they are singly borne. And we'll talk about those very quickly. But the technical term for a group of needles in a bundle is a fascicle. Okay, this should say hemlock, and I don't think that's, no, it's somewhere built into it. Hemlock. This is a singly borne needle. You come up to the tree, you look at it, and you'll see that there's individual needles, and they are flat. And this one is the hemlock. And don't worry about how long it is. We can get into that later on here. But the singly borne needle is a hemlock. And another one is the bald cypress, which is over here. So, there's one more we're going to deal with, and that is the spruce. Spruce is singly borne too. Now, the spruces that are in your front yard are not native trees. Those are brought in by landscapers. The only place you can find naturally growing naturally growing spruce trees are on Black Mountain at the far end of the state. They grow in a very colder climate, and it's usually on the top of Black Mountain. That's the only place you're going to find naturally growing spruce. And they too are singly borne. I will tell you this about spruce, that if you take that one needle off of a spruce and you roll it in your finger, you will find out that there's 4 sides to that needle. On a spruce, there are 4 sides. Now again, the ones that are in your front yard are spruces. They just aren't native. So you can take those off and you can roll them and you can feel the 4 sides. Hemlock and bald cypress are as flat as a pancake. All right?
Are fir trees like that with the needles that come up?
Yes, right. And again, we don't have any firs here in Kentucky. Right, okay, but yes, you're right. So these are the one that have only one needle. Okay, now what we're going to do is to get into the bundles. And the first bundle we're going to talk about is Virginia pine. And you can see this one right here. There are 2 needles in that fascicle. 2 needles. All right? So if right now, if I brought in a bunch of limbs and I threw them on the table and one was a conifer and it had 2 needles in a bundle or in a fascicle, it would be a Virginia pine. All right? And I think I have another one. Yes, we're going to go to 3 now. So now if we go to a limb and we find 3 needles in that bundle, it is going to be a pitch pine. Pitch pine grows in the mountains in the eastern part of the state, and they grow very high. They like it where it's dry and sandy. So that's why you don't see or hear too much about pitch pine. And then what I'm going to do is throw this one in, and that is shortleaf. On any one branch, if you go up and down the branch, you will find fascicles of 2 or 3. It is the forestry professor's friend on a test. And they usually do it on Friday. And what it is they will take and throw this particular branch out, the shortleaf. I don't have a picture of it, but it looks like any one of these. And what happens is a student will not use the scientific method. A student will use first come, first serve. So the student will look and say, it's got 2 needles, it has to be a Virginia pine. Or another student next door will see the 3s and they'll say, that's got to be a pitch. So whenever you look at any leaf, I don't care if it's a conifer or anything, take a holistic approach to the leaf and to the limb and make sure you're getting a representation of what the leaves truly are. And so the short leaf is made up of a branch that has fascicles of 2 or 3. Loblolly is not a naturalized, it is now. It is not a naturally grown tree here in Kentucky. It's not native. And loblolly has 3 needles, and you're going to say, well, pitch has 3, what's the difference? Loblolly are extremely long. Loblolly was imported from the south. It was a very, very good tree to grow. It grows very rapidly, and it was used in the paper manufacturing process. Western Kentucky has a tremendous amount of loblolly in it growing. They closed a plant that was using the loblolly. I hear that they just opened it last week. Well, somebody said they're going to buy it and open it back up. So they're going to be back into the production of, or making sure that there's loblolly out there. We only have 1 more to go in the conifers, and that is the white pine. And the white pine, that's the friendly one at the holiday gift-giving time, and that is you can put your arm in there and out so many times it doesn't matter, putting those lights on and putting decorations on. It is a very, what we call soft tree, and it has 5 needles growing on it, or growing in a bundle, in a fascicle. Okay? So those basically, I'm not concerned that you know the names of the trees, but those are the characteristics that we're looking for on these trees. And that is basically how many needles in a bundle. If they're not in a bundle, then they have to be onesies. All right? And again, we're not trying to put labels on trees yet. We're simply trying to point out characteristics. You've learned everything there is to know about conifers, and that's why we're going to move on to the broadleafs. Broadleafs, what's another definition of a broadleaf? Pardon?
Deciduous.
Deciduous, right. Deciduous means falls off just as you're getting ready to learn how to identify them. Which is happening right about now. You'll have leaves on a tree. Over the 40 years that I've worked, I've seen it move about a week and sometimes 2 weeks. It used to be the 2nd week of October, but now it's getting very, very late in October, and you'll still be able to see leaves on the trees. But don't wait around that long to start to learn how to do this. Okay, we need to talk about the bud first, because this is the most important aspect of the tree. When you go to identify a deciduous tree, deciduous tree, whenever you go to identify them, the first thing you want to do is hone in on that bud. Find that bud. Because when you find that bud, you have now identified a lot of characteristics, or at least from that bud, you know where to go to find the characteristics. So the bud, and we have what we refer to as the terminal bud here, and these three right here are the terminal lateral buds. So you have the terminal bud and lateral bud. Can someone tell me what is in that bud? It sits there from the end of May until next April. What is inside there? Next year's growth, and that encapsulates a lot of things. Terminal growth is in there, whatever growth that is. If it's going straight out, the terminal bud would make it longer, or lateral buds would make it move out to the side. And when you come to cut my grass, I will have to tell you about a tree that has grown during the summer laterally, and it's causing me frustrations. I haven't taken the time to cut that one branch off. But it'll slap you in the face every time you go by. But I'll warn you where it is when you come to cut my grass. Not only that, but that is where the flowers are, and the flowers turn into fruit. All right, so there's a lot of things going on inside that bud. Fruits, leaves, and the new buds for next year. Worst time, there's 1 week is the worst time to go identifying trees. Is anybody in the school systems here? One person, and this is when you're going to call upon resource people to come out and take your kids out. The second week of May is probably the worst time because those buds have opened up, but yet they haven't reformed yet. And so she is going to ask a resource person to come out there and identify trees, and if they do it the same way I do, there ain't no buds. It's real hard to see those buds. But it's only that 1 or 2 weeks of the year. Any other time is good for leaves, except in the dead of winter when the kids don't want to go out anyway, it's too cold. Okay, so here is another collage of pictures. I want to just show you characteristics of buds. That is a bud. That is pawpaw. It's a very flexible bud. It's not stiff at all. Here is a round bud. Here is a very long bud. This is this same tree too. That is a beech, and again, it's a very long bud. Sometimes those things are 3 feet. They're about 3 inches long. Here is simply a longer bud, meaning longer than this round one. Here is a pen line here. This is a bud. It's about 2, 3, 4 inches sometimes. That's on one of our magnolias. I'm going to save this one, and this one right down here, it's a very pointed bud. And this particular one right here, I know we're going to get a story started here. We refer to it as a duck-billed shaped bud. Does anybody know what that tree is over there? From that. Okay, let me ask you this. Does anybody know what the state tree is? Yes, it is tulip poplar. There's usually somebody in the group. Your age group is maybe not the ones to... Yes, coffee tree. Is this what you learned at some... Okay. Yes, yes, I know exactly. What happened was, I'll digress here for a moment. It's important. Because if you go out and you start, going out to schools to do programs, or you go out with a group to do programs, and you ask what is the state tree, there's a state mineral too, isn't there?
Yes.
Coal.
Is it coal?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. What's the state flower? I know that one. And a state bird? Cardinal. And I don't know if you deal with water, there's a I'm sorry, not water, but soil. There is a state soil too. Do you know that one?
Dirt.
I strongly suggest that if you have somebody up here talking about soils, do not call it dirt, because they come right over the tables at you and grab your soils. It's called Kreider, and it's a soil type that's out in western Kentucky. But getting back to our state tree, the yellow poplar, tulip poplar, or tulip tree is another name for it. We did not have a state tree up until about the early 1990s. All along, the state tree was assumed to be the yellow poplar, but it was never decreed by government. Now, you see where this story might be leading, because government now got into nature. So in the 1990s, state legislatures decided we had to have an official tree with an official document or declaration of documentation. So what they did is, they knew they were going to do this, and so what they did is they had the state forests rev up the production of the state tree, which was now going to be the Kentucky coffee tree. And I mean, they planted gazillions of these seeds to be passed out in schools. Now, some of you may have gotten some of these trees. And so they had a blitz. I mean, they had it in the paper, TV, everything. The state tree is now going to be the Kentucky coffee tree. Now, the reason they did it, I can totally understand. It had the name in the tree. I can totally understand. And